Open, and our discussion with you is about the use by a president of executive orders. They're obviously often used to speed the legislative process along when presidents reach frustration. They're accused of going around Congress by using executive orders. We'd like to engage with you in a debate about whether or not you think they're an effective tool. This current president has begun using them of late. And also, if you have some questions of history or would you like to make comments, all of that on the table during our session with Ambassador Adams.
Checks and balances for the preservation of the republic. But again, if you read the Federalist papers, you've got to have enough energy in the executive in times of crisis, domestic or foreign, to act.
Just as an example from history, and Ambassador Abshar referenced some of these, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus by executive order during the Civil War. Theodore Roosevelt created 5 national parks using it. Franklin Roosevelt established the internment camps during World War II by executive order. And Harry Truman, as the ambassador just said, during the Korean War, seized federal control of the country's steel mills. How has President Obama been using executive orders?
Well, he has stepped up recently under the mantra, "We can't wait." And move them when there was with the proprietary drugs. It was a crisis. He moved decisively. He has done it in the executive branch on cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse, and savings. And so he's and of course in the intervention in Libya, which was a peculiar intervention. I was ambassador to NATO. You had to keep NATO up front. You wanted to keep the Arab world up front. So we were in there playing a decisive role, but in an indirect way, to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe.
This is Mason, Independent.
Ellen, I was wondering if you might be able to explain, as best you can on television, the difference between a presidential directive and an executive order, and also, one of the presidential directives or executive orders were used in the past to make internment camps, and you have to kind of wonder, will they be used like that again? Is there something we can do to make sure that a president can't go, well, I just want to put these people in this camp just to keep them safe or keep us safe or whatever? Is there something we could do to limit that?
Thank you.
And
well, the presidential directive is more when you're refining the approach in the executive order. It tends to be on a new initiative. Now, in any use of power, there can be abuse of power, and that's innate, and that depends upon the wisdom of the president. Now, the internment camps were against the Japanese, which are so horrendous upon the greatness of presidents. We've been blessed with some truly great presidents.
And who would they be?
Well, George Washington was the first. He was the model. He was sacrificial. He was sort of a horse's ass when he was young. He learned. He grew. And he was a Cincinnatus. He turned down power. And that's why they gave him so much power. They knew he'd turn down power. It's the only reason that fighting against George III, they gave their chief executive so much power.
This viewer sends by Twitter this question. Mr. Abshar seems to be arguing for a stronger executive, which may not be found in Article 2 of the Constitution.
I go back to the Federalist Papers interpreting it, and energy in the executive, and if you don't have energy along with wisdom, that's got to be going in the right direction. And we had an Andrew Johnson. We've had other presidents, Grant, great commander, but we were disappointed in. And so my latest book was A Call to Greatness, and we need presidents that rise to greatness, and sometimes they do. But I think you get that study of history. Lincoln studied his history. Washington, those people studied their history. Today, people don't know their history.
Princess Anne, Wisconsin. Dave is a Republican there. Good morning, Dave.
Morning. I wondered, one of these executive orders, somebody called in and asked him where there was a constitutional power or something that could allow the president to use an executive order to bypass Congress. And I don't think he answered the question.
The Constitution does not circumscribe the power of the executive action. It does on declaring war. And as you know, the irony of that, we've had 5 declared wars and about 130 undeclared actions. And so the executive orders really began because this big tall guy, bigger than everybody else, that moved into the presidency, a good executive, he was the guy that formed up the executive branch, created the departments. There were no departments created. He did all of this by his own orders. And so your question really relates to at what point do those orders exceed the intent of the presidency, and that is a gray area. And as you know, the Constitution, it's been said, is a sets up a situation of contention under some struggle for power, and that's all right. And where if the country, the survival of the country, is in danger, you are much more dependent upon a strong executive, and your check is to elect great presidents.
Next is Cleveland, Ohio. Jim, an independent. Hello, Jim.
Hello. Hello, Mr. Epshire, and hello to your host.
Yes, sir. Your question for us.
On your assertion that the Federalist Papers call for an energetic executive, I disagree with that. I think you're espousing Hamilton's view, and Madison, who wrote most of the other half of the Federalist Papers, disagree with that. And we must remember that Hamilton was a monarchist. If he had had his way, we would have had a king. How do you think the government would be if we had if we were under Madison's government, the style that he wanted?
That's a good question, and you're right. There is a difference in the Madisonian papers and the Hamilton papers, and you know, in the debt assumption, the president went with Hamilton because we were headed for depression and we had to take over the credit of the states. But Madison, who had a brilliant mind and brought so much, was not a very able president. He was a much better as a legislator, a writer, and a thinker. And it's interesting that a very mistaken war was the War of 1812, where the White House burned, and we were victorious only on sea, and Jackson won a big battle, but it was after the war was over. So and then his party, and he was a part of this, did this amazing U-turn and reinvented itself and took over a good part of the Whig agenda. So, but he, in what he wrote, was a good balancer of Hamilton needed, but when he was actually the executive, I don't think he fitted the job.
It'll be our last call. Villages, Florida. Gregory, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello?
Yes.
Good morning. Happy
good morning. There was a ruling by the Supreme Court back in Truman's time against an executive order 10340 from President Harry S. Truman, placing all steel mills in the country under federal control, was invalid because it attempted to make law rather than to clarify or act to further a law put forth by Congress or the Constitution. In other words, it did set some limits on the what can be done with an executive order.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Absolutely. There are limits on the executive order. I'm not for government by executive orders. You know, if you read my writings, I'm for developing a consensus. But I'm saying that that if you start with the first case of Washington, where you've got certain things you've got to do, you've got to have a president that acts, and the Constitution left a lot of power with the president. It did not define it because they figured every president would be as sacrificial and as good as George Washington. Of course, they were wrong, but nevertheless, that was the origin.
We're closing out here. What usefulness